This week's episode of our show is sponsored by the Deck of Many's Animated Spells Kickstarter. They've just launched their latest campaign featuring reference cards fully animated for the highest level spells in the game, a deck of animated tarot cards, and much, much more. To give you an idea of what's in store for this campaign, take a look at some of these cards from their first Kickstarter campaign, including the exclusive Meteor Swarm card.
If you've watched any of our videos, you know it can be difficult to get the rules for spells and spellcasting right in the heat of battle.
The Deck of Many's durable cards are perfect for staying on top of the rules at the table, and they're fully compatible with 5th edition.
Not only are they amazingly useful, the gorgeous animations help visualize the mystical energy swirling around as you cast your spells.
Visit animatedspells.com or follow the links in the description below to find the campaign on Kickstarter.
And now, on to this week's episode.
Greetings, my name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. Welcome to our channel where we cover everything Dungeons & Dragons, including advice for players and guides for Dungeon Masters.
We upload new videos every Thursday, so please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Today, we are taking a look at 5 common rules mistakes players in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition make when playing a spellcasting class.
So today we're going to look at 5 of the biggest misconceptions with the abilities of classes like the Bard, the Druid, the Warlock, Wizard, Sorcerer, and Cleric. There's a lot to discuss today, so let's get rolling.
Kicking things off, we're going to take a look at the Bard's Jack-of-all-trades ability. Now, on paper, this is a very simple ability. Your Bard gets to add 1/2 of their proficiency modifier to any ability check that they make that doesn't already apply their proficiency bonus. This seems simple on paper. You get to add half your proficiency bonus to skill checks, even if you're not proficient in those skills. But what many players don't realize is that there's more ability checks in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition than just the ability checks that you make using skills such as Stealth, Deception, Intimidation, and Arcana.
On top of all the skills on your character sheet, you're also going to be using Jack of all trades for things like opposed strength checks or even initiative rolls. A lot of people don't realize that initiative is a dexterity-based ability check, and you can apply Jack of all trades to this as well.
Jack of all trades can also come up in some interesting ways with spellcasting as a bard. If your bard selected the Dispel Magic spell or took Counterspell with one of their magical secrets, and you're trying to dispel or counter a spell of a higher level spell slot than what you use to cast Dispel Magic or Counterspell, you have to make a spellcasting ability check to see if you successfully dispel or counter that spell. As a bard, you get to add your Jack of all trades bonus to this check.
The other major misconception here is where this doesn't apply. Jack of all trades cannot be used for saving throws or attack rolls. Some people get this misconstrued and think that their skills encompass everything that they do, but saving throws and attack rolls are something wholly different and therefore do not get to use Jack of all trades.
Characters in Dungeons & Dragons make all sorts of rolls. They make damage rolls, they make attack rolls, they make saving throws, they make ability checks. But an ability check is always a roll made using a d20 to hit a target number. And quite commonly, you don't add Jack of all trades to damage rolls that your bard makes with their spells or other abilities such as weapon attacks. Jack of all trades only applies to ability checks made using a d20.
The next rules misconception that we're going to be looking at is the comparison between the Cleric's domain spells and the Warlock's expanded spell list. On paper, these two options look very, very similar, but they actually work entirely different. So we're going to discuss what those differences are.
As a cleric, you have a list of prepared spells, but as a warlock, you have a list of spells known. When you are casting spells, as a cleric, you choose the spells that you want to cast from the spells that you've prepared, and as a warlock, you choose the spells that you want to cast from the spells that you know. The cleric's domain spells are added to the spells that they have prepared and are always available to the cleric to cast as long as they have a spell slot available to them of the appropriate level.
When we look at the Warlock's expanded spell list, this instead is a list of spells that are optional to take when the Warlock is choosing their spells known. They don't get automatically added in, they're just additional options.
This can be very disappointing, as it looks like on paper that the Warlocks are getting 10 additional spells known thanks to their expanded spell list, but unfortunately, that's not the case. You don't automatically learn these spells granted to you by your patron. Instead, they are part of the general list of Warlock spells that you can select when you level up, as long as you have those from your patron.
All cleric spells work like so. You choose your prepared spells, which is level plus wisdom modifier for the amount of spells you get. You add your domain spells to that, and then you use your spell slots to cast those spells. This is different than if we look at all the Warlock spells, which work like so. You add your expanded spell list, then choose your spells known from the combined list, determined by your level, and then you use your spell slots to cast those spells.
So your Warlock will never know more spells than what are said on the table for your character's level, whereas your Cleric will often have a number of spells prepared equal to their level, plus their wisdom modifier, plus however many levels worth of domain spells they've unlocked.
The next topic of discussion is going to be regarding the Druid's Wild Shape. Now, instead of talking about the entire feature, which we have another video for, which I'll put the links in, we are going to specifically talk about how Wild Shape works with spellcasting and the way that these two work together, because this is where a lot of confusion can come for new Druid players.
When your Druid is in a wild shape form, you cannot cast spells. Many players are confused about this and think that perhaps that if they choose a wild shape form that has hands and can manipulate spell components or can form words, or they try to cast spells that don't have verbal components or somatic components, that they can still cast these spells while they're wild shaped. That is not the case. Your ability to cast spells as a Druid in wild shape is not dependent on the components of that spell. Instead, your ability to cast spells as a Druid is, are you in wild shape? If so, you cannot cast spells. Unless you're a level 18 Druid, in which case, knock yourself out.
Now, aside from not being able to cast spells, there is a very important fact about the Druid's Wild Shape, and that is that a Druid in Wild Shape is allowed to maintain concentration on a spell they cast prior to wild shaping. And this is where the Druid really shines, in my opinion.
Yeah, this means that if you have wild shaped into a bear, you can still have Call Lightning or Fairy Fire or Polymorph or Conjure Animals still in effect, as long as you cast that spell before you transformed into your wild shape form.
The Druid at my table combines Moonbeam and a bear form in almost every combat encounter that we get into. They cast Moonbeam on their enemy, run in, turn into a bear, and start mauling them. And if a spell has an option that allows you to continue to manipulate that spell on subsequent turns, you can do this. So now our Druid is a bear running around the battlefield in melee combat, and there's a Moonbeam moving around the battlefield damaging enemies as well. It's a great combination, and it works as a Druid.
This is very effective as a Circle of the Moon Druid, because you can use your action to cast the spell and then your bonus action to transform, so you're ready for battle in a single turn.
Keep in mind that if you do lose your concentration on the spell, though, you will have to revert back to your form in order to cast a spell with concentration again before going back into wild shape.
I feel like a broken record bringing this one up again, but it's really important to discuss. The next one on our list is the Sorcerer's Meta Magic, specifically Quickened Spell, and how casting spells as a bonus action interacts with your regular spell casting.
Now again, we have an entire episode talking about the Sorcerer's Meta Magic, which goes into detail about all the different options available. But we want to specifically focus on Quickened Spell, which allows you to switch the casting time of a spell that usually has a casting time of one action to one bonus action.
This is not a restriction of sorcerers, but applies to all spellcasters. If you cast a spell as a bonus action, you cannot cast another spell that turn except for a cantrip with a casting time of one action. This means that a sorcerer can quicken a fireball to cast it as a bonus action, and then follow that up in the same turn by casting Firebolt with their main action, but they could not then follow up that quickened fireball with another fireball. This even applies to all spellcasters. So if you're a wizard and you cast Misty Step, which uses your bonus action, you then couldn't cast Fireball in that same turn. You now must only cast a cantrip with a casting time of 1 action.
One place where this can be misconstrued is the idea that people say there is no possible way whatsoever to cast 2 spells on a turn. But that's actually not true. The way that the text is written specifies that this is when you cast a spell as a bonus action. Now your action can only be a cantrip. If you have a way to gain multiple actions on a turn, you can in fact cast more than 1 spell.
Finally, we come to perhaps one of the most confusing class features in the game, and that is the Wizard's Spellbook itself. I don't really understand why this gets such a bad rap for being so confusing, because in my mind, it's quite straightforward. But I do think it's important that we explain exactly how a Wizard's Spellbook works so that new players can understand just how simple it actually is.
Now, we do talk a lot about the nuances of how spellcasting works in our video for spells and spellcasting, which we'll link here. But when we talk about the spellbook specifically, there's a few ways that this works differently than every other spellcaster in the game. And this is because the book does add an additional step between your spells known, your spells prepared. Now there's also the spells you have written in your spell book and how those play into spellcasting.
Your wizard begins play with several first level spells in their spellbook, and every time you gain a level, you get to add 2 spells to that spellbook. If during your adventures you encounter other pieces of arcane magical writing, you can spend your downtime and some gold to copy those spells into your spellbook. Then, when your wizard prepares their spells for the day, they get to choose spells from their spellbook to prepare, not the entire wizard spell list. The wizard spell list defines what spells are allowed to go into your spellbook and what spells you can pick from when you're picking those 2 spells when you level up.
So to try to make this as simple as possible, here's how it works. You have your list of all of the available wizard spells, which you can find in the player's handbook. It's the wizard spell list. From this list, you're going to be putting spells into your spell book. Think of the spell book like your recipe book. When you are looking at your recipe book, does it have every recipe available to you in the world? No, these are the ones that you've written down into your recipe book. After you have this list of spells that you have put into your spell book, you can choose from your spell book to prepare spells for that day. So it goes all wizard spells, which ones are going to go into the spells in your spell book, and which spells are you going to prepare for the day.
It's also worth noting that wizards have some enhanced abilities regarding ritual spells. Not only do wizards not need to use a spell slot when they cast a spell as a ritual, they don't need to have that spell prepared either, as long as that spell is in their spellbook and they have access to their spellbook. So while clerics, bards, and druids have to both prepare the ritual spell in order to cast it as a ritual, wizards don't even have to prepare their ritual spells at all.
Find Familiar is a spell available in the wizard spell list, but if you didn't choose to write it into your spell book, you cannot cast the spell. However, if it is in your spell book, but you didn't choose to prepare it for the day, you can still cast it as a ritual because it is a ritual spell. So the benefit of adding ritual spells to your spell book is that you can actually prepare a list of spells that are not rituals while still maintaining access to ritual spells.
The number of spells that you can prepare from your spellbook is equal to your wizard level plus your intelligence modifier.
Also, keep in mind, we have tons of videos about some of the best spells and the way that they work and different features from different classes that might add a bit of confusion. If this wasn't comprehensive enough and you're looking for a deeper dive into one of these topics, we may have a few different options for videos that dive deeper into things like Sorcerer Meta Magic or Druid Wild Shape. So always keep in mind that there are a lot of nuances to these abilities. Even as an experienced player, a lot of people can miss a few rules, and that's okay. If you've looked at the rulebook, if you're new or experienced in Dungeons & Dragons, the whole point is to have fun. Missing a rule here and there isn't really a problem. We're just here to hopefully help you learn them and make better decisions and use your resources better moving forward. So this has been a look at 5 commonly mistaken spellcasting class features in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. If you've made any other major mistakes with some of the nuances of spellcasting, let us know about them in the comments below.
Our videos are made possible thanks to the generosity of our Patreon supporters. If you're enjoying our work and want to help contribute to our show, please check us out by following the links in the description below to join our community.
Don't forget to check out our live play in the Worlds of Drakenheim, which airs Tuesday nights at 6 p.m. Eastern at twitch.tv/dungeon_dudes. You can find all the previous episodes right up over here.
And we have plenty more coverage on the rules for spells, spellcasters, and classes in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time in the dungeon.